You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 143 for August 15th, 2018. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about the 10 on, 4 off work schedule and fire and smoke health and safety concerns. So get out your P95 smoke mask because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. All right, welcome to the show, everybody. Joining me today is Sonia in Utah.
Hello.
Part of the smoky West, just like I am.
I know. It's kind of nasty outside.
I know. And we're going to talk about that. But first, it's Sunday, August 12th as we're recording this. And this podcast is coming out August 15th, I believe. And both Sonia and I recently saw a post, and we were talking about this before the recording. So I want to start out talking about this. And knowing how I know us, we'll probably talk about this for the entire first segment, but we'll see. But anyway, yeah, we saw a post on social media. I know. We saw a post on social media, and I'm just going to paraphrase real fast here. This person is saying, she's talking about the 10 on 4 off work schedule, which you guys in the East Coast of the United States may not be too familiar with because a lot of East Coast projects just tend to be a little closer, and they tend to be Monday through Friday. I'm not really sure what the deal is there, but anyway, in the West here, I think it's mostly because of access, if I had to guess. You know, when you got to drive 2 hours, 4 hours just to get into the middle of nowhere to get to a project area, you're not going to commute to that very much. So you minimize the commute, you maximize your time off, or at least you pool your time off altogether in one spot, and you do what's called a 10-4 or a 10 on, 4 off schedule. 10 days on, 4 days off. Some companies do 8 days on, 6 days off, where they work longer days for the 8 days. But I appreciate the time off on those days, but I don't think you get more productivity out of people because you're just wrecked by the end of the day anyway. So
yeah.
Anyway, this person is saying on social media, if you're working close to home, that would be one thing, but what archaeologists can afford to either spend 2 days of their 4 days off driving back and forth or footing the bill for 4 nights in a hotel? So I'll tell you what, when my wife and I were first doing archaeology back in the East Coast, and we were typically Monday through Friday, and a lot of our projects were, from the house, from home or from the office, and then we go out and do them. We come back every day. That's not to say they were all like that. We did have some where we stayed in a hotel, but we would come back on Friday. We'd go out on Monday morning and we'd come back on Friday. And we got out to the West, this whole 10 on 4 off thing was crazy. And since we didn't really have a place to live when we first got out here, it was actually kind of ideal for us because we were camping or doing something or traveling or whatever anyway. So it was kind of like we were given a little mini vacation every 2 weeks. And that was pretty great. Being done with that 10 days and then having that 4 days off was a pretty awesome thing for us at the time. But I understand that if you're just, you're struggling to pay the bills, you're doing whatever you got to do, like most people are, and that 4 days off can be a burden. That's actually why we left one company when we first came out here, because it was 8 on, 6 off. And when we were coming back to Reno, and that company forced us to come back to Reno, which was part of the problem. If we could have stayed in the city that we were in, that's one thing, but they didn't pay us unless we were in the vehicle, and we couldn't afford to lose that 3 hours of travel time, which really amounted to 6 hours of travel time, 3 out and 3 back.
That's awful.
I know. So we had to come back to Reno since we were in Reno for the 6 days off, and we had no place to live because we had no home. We'd come from the East Coast. We got rid of our apartment. We were basically living out of the vehicle. And so we started,
you do when you're a young professional.
Exactly. Sure, like you do. So we decided, let's go up to Lake Tahoe because it's beautiful and we'd never been up there. So we were camping up there, but California campgrounds are like $30 a night.
Yeah, they're super expensive. Holy crap.
I know, and especially Lake Tahoe. If you could even get Lake Tahoe in the summer for like 5 nights total, then, good luck for that. But
that's why I like the BLM or the Forest Service. Sometimes it's better.
Right.
And sometimes they will have facilities for you.
Yeah, and we eventually learned that, but we didn't know at the time. So we were kind of trying to figure it out. And then we were price lining hotels when we got tired of camping because it was a several month long project. And, we'd price line a hotel and we'd get the Sands in Reno for like $25 a night, which isn't the most glorious place to stay. Ironically, I live almost across the street from there now, but it's, Yeah, I can see it. But
Aw, memories.
I know, right? And it was cheap. It was nice to stay there for not that much money. And I guess when you look at the grand scheme of things, it was, our total outlay in cost, even with expensive camping, was less than we'd pay in rent in like an apartment overall. So still our housing costs were still lower than they would be if we lived somewhere. So I guess my whole point of saying all this is my answer to this person, and I haven't answered on social media because when comments get up over about 40 comments, I don't answer because
It's pretty much been covered.
Yeah, it's either been covered or they're not paying attention anymore.
Yeah, it's a big gripe fest.
It really is. And I guess my thing is, though, as with everything in CRM that we tend to complain about, you know what you're getting into. And if you don't know what you're getting into, listen to this podcast because we'll tell you. But, you should know what you're getting into, and don't take a job that's too far away where you don't want to come back. If you know that the job is a day's drive away and you have to spend 10 hours driving on Friday and 10 hours driving on Monday to get back, then don't take that job if you can't afford to stay there, or if you can't afford to get your hotel room, or if you can't afford to camp or do whatever you're going to do. You got to set up your vehicle. You've got to set up your lifestyle to do this job. You're not just going to get everything handed to you. And I don't understand why people think this is a regular 9 to 5. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to come home. I'm going to watch football. I'm going to do whatever the hell normal people do in the evening. And that's just not the way this job is. And I'm sorry, but that's the way it's probably going to be for a really long time because of the way we have to go out and do things, and the way finances work, and the way projects work, and the way scheduling works, and the way we have to go, 6 hours into the desert just to find our project area. That's just how it is. So that's my opinion.
I mean, I've been in this business for 20 plus years now, and I've never looked at a 10-4 or an 8-6 as trying to screw me over. I always just figured that was the work schedule, and when I'm not working, I'm responsible for myself. And it's not easy, especially when you're first starting out, and it's certainly not desired when you have no money. And that's why, sometimes you can split costs with peers or friends, or you can crash in your car, which I have done. But, as I got into business, I learned a little bit more about, what the 10-4, 8-6 schedule was all about. And it's not about screwing over employees in any way. It's about getting the project done. And a lot of it has to do with minimizing overtime, or maximizing productivity. And those two do kind of go hand in hand. But I mean, if you think about it, if you're working in, let's say, a 10-4 schedule, you'll start on Friday or start on a Wednesday and you'll end on a Friday. And that's because, hypothetically, let's say for example purposes, your pay week ends on a Sunday and starts on Monday, the next Monday. So if you start on Wednesday, you work 8 hours a day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, that's 40 hours. And then you'd work 8 hours a day from Monday through Friday, which is another 40 hours. So there's your 10 hours, or your 40 hours per week. You're 80 hours over one pay period. And you also get 10 days in a row, which the intent was to maximize the productivity during that time. If the client or the company allows for overtime, then you may work 10 hours a day and increase that to maybe 50 hours a week. Does that make sense? The intent is, never in my 20 plus years of working in archaeology was the intent to screw over employees by getting those 4 or 6 days off. It was simply, you're not working, therefore you're not getting any benefits. Does that make sense?
Right.
We don't get paid for not working unless you have a specific type of contract. So therefore, why would you receive the benefit of a hotel room if you weren't working that day? So, that's kind of how that functions. So, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, a quick comment on the Wednesday to Friday schedule. That's interesting because I've actually never worked that schedule of 10 on 4 off. I've done lots of 10 and 4s, but the work week's always started on a Sunday. So it's
Oh,
always been Tuesday to Thursday for me, which is
okay.
weird.
I mean, and it really, it depends on your on when your pay the week starts and stops.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in each company is different. Like, for example, in my company, we have Monday through Sunday. So
hmm
the week starts on Monday and it ends on Sunday.
Right.
So that's why we do it Wednesday through Friday.
I think if companies are going to try to save money, if that's your argument that they're trying to screw you so they can save money and maximize their bottom line, which, to be fair, that is what companies do. I mean, they do that, and some will do that at the expense of the employee. Let's be honest about this. But
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I'm not
yeah,
talking about 100% of companies here. I'm talking about
sure.
more ethical
Well,
ones.
and I'm not even talking about lodging, because most of the time lodging affects the company employees too, because they also have to stay out there. They also have to do whatever they're going to do. They also have to drive. So
Mm-hmm.
the salaried employees are being affected. So you're less likely to be screwed based on lodging. It's more likely to be in your benefit. And I'll give an example of one way that you can do that. I would say, I don't know the proper way, but at least one way that I think personally benefits everyone, which is, I went when I had one of my big projects down in California. There happened to be this agency in town, and I understand that not all places have this, but Airbnb's becoming a thing, and that might actually solve this problem. But
Mm-hmm. That's true.
yeah, this one place called VIP Housing down in Ridgecrest, California. We found them, and they had fully furnished 2, 3, and I think 4 bedroom. No, I think it was only 3 bedroom apartments, but 2 and 3 bedroom apartments that were. We had I think that I had a 2 bedroom because I had other people staying in there at various times, and I had a 2 bedroom, and I think it was like $650 a month, and that included, of course, all the utilities and everything. And they'd have somebody come in and do major cleaning like once every couple weeks, but otherwise, you
Wow.
wash your own sheets and all that. Yeah, but it was a
650
fully
plus
furnished,
utilities, or
yeah, it was a
including
fully furnished
utilities.
apartment. That's it. That's including utilities. So,
Wow.
yeah, cable TV.
It's like
It was a big screen
$22
TV.
a day,
I know.
fully furnished.
I know. So
And they come and
fully
clean
furnished. Yeah. So we had, and we could even use the mailbox. We were there for long enough, so people would change their address to there because it was an apartment complex. They basically owned apartments in
Wow.
apartment complexes around Ridgecrest, and it depended on where you were going to be. But I talked to the company and said, listen, I've got a handful of people coming in, and they're all going to want a place to stay. And I've suggested to them, because I gave them I think it was $120 a day per diem or something on that project, so they could do whatever they wanted. But I suggested to them, because this is what I was doing, that they contact VIP Housing, because I'd researched it. It was cheaper than a decent hotel in Ridgecrest. It wasn't cheaper than a shitty hotel in Ridgecrest, but who wants to stay there for 8 months?
Yeah.
And and most of the people anyway were either not going anywhere for the weekend, because we were 10 on 4 off. So they were either not going anywhere for the weekend, or they were using that as their like base of operations to go out and explore.
Mhm.
Maybe they would go somewhere. But like one of the guys, he lived in San Diego, so it was like a 4-hour drive. He'd go home every once in a while. The other guy also lived in San Diego, but he didn't go home every time, because one of the guys, he had a wife, so he would go back and see her.
That's kind of important.
It's
That's
kind of important. I know. So that's what I would do
Kind of
too.
important. Dude.
I know. So that's what I would do too. I would use that time, because it was about a 6.5 hour drive for me to go back to Reno.
Yeah.
So sometimes I would go home as well, but sometimes my wife would come down to Ridgecrest, and sometimes, which was really cool, we would meet halfway and camp in Yosemite for 4 days, because it was
Wow.
halfway for both of us.
That's
so,
nice.
yeah, it was really nice.
One
So,
other thing I want to add is, depending on the way that a contract is written, and sometimes it's not up to the archaeology company on this. Sometimes it's state policy or the federal policy.
mhm.
If, for example, in the state of Utah, on many of my state projects, not necessarily all of them, but many of them, we have a requirement, and they actually audit this when they review our invoices. We have a requirement that if you got hotel,
Mhm.
then you needed to work on the night and the day after, a portion of the day after, in order to get that hotel room. So there's no way for us to pay for 4 days off for a hotel, because the agency that we're working for won't pay for it. It's not about budget. Perhaps the budget could handle that, but it has nothing to do with how the budget's written. It has everything to do with that company policy or that agency's policy. So before throwing it out and saying it's all the company, trying to screw over the employee, think about that sometimes it's actually not the company and it's the client that you're working for.
Right.
It may be the state that you're working for. There are a lot of factors at play regarding days off and hotels. I was on a project in Utah that lasted, 18 months, almost 24 months, and we worked 6 days a week, and the client agreed to pay for that 7th day hotel. We weren't getting per diem for it, but because we were working for 6 days, there's nowhere we could have gone to go back home. We used that 7th day to get ready for the next week. So the client agreed to pay for it. So it's not always the company. I promise you it's not the company trying to screw you over in all cases. Some companies are a-holes, others aren't. But I just beg people to think about that instead of going after your employer, because it's not always their fault.
Well, yeah, and this all boils down to the same thing for me. First off, ask questions during your interview. How many people, when they say when they're called on the phone and they're told about the project and they're offered the job, how many people say anything beyond when do I have to be there? How many, sure, you might find out what your pay is. You probably find out what your per diem is. Not all cases. Some people get out there and they have no idea what their per diem is. But ask questions, find out what their policies are, find out what the deal is, and then actually say no. How many people actually said no to a job posting before? If it doesn't fit, just say no. And quite honestly, if you say that this was the only thing available and I had to do it to pay my bills, well, then you need to level up your skills. You need to work somewhere else. And if you don't like 10 on 4 off, just flat out as a policy, then you either change jobs here in the West Coast or you move to the East Coast where you'll get a better schedule, because that's how it is. Yeah. That's how it works.
I mean, ask questions. That's a great suggestion. And maybe we should post some, Chris, because honestly, when I get people calling me or I call them for an interview, I say, do you have any questions for me? Have I covered everything? And they're like, no, everything's great. And I'm like, sometimes I'll prod them and I'll be like, do you have any questions about the schedule? Do you have any questions about hotel or accommodations? Anything like that? That's not my job to do. If you don't have any questions, it's not my job to force feed you information.
Yeah.
And if I were a company, if my business were a company that was trying to screw you over, you'd be my favorite type of applicant. If you don't ask questions, it's going to be,
I can't stress enough how many times I've put this information out there. A long time ago, I wrote a blog post on, that basically had a checklist of interview questions that you should be asking when you get the opportunity. And that turned into, it's an entire chapter in my book with a checklist of questions that you should ask. And I've done videos about it. I have a webinar on Team Black that happens once a month called the Jobs Webinar, and it's free, absolutely free for people to take.
Free.
And there's a whole section in there. Free. It's a whole section in there on the questions you should ask during the interview. What should you know during the interview? And
you're not going to get roped into buying anything, right, Chris?
No, absolutely not. There are paid webinars on there if you want to go. They're still only $20, but that's a free webinar. It's not a sales funnel. It's not anything else. All the job-related webinars on Team Black at arccert.black are always free. I decided that anything that helps you get a job is always going to be free. Anything that helps you keep a job or level up your skills, you're going to pay for that because it has value. But anything that helps you get a job and stay in this business, well, that's going to be free. So there's a few of them on there that are free, and I don't try to push anything else on you. So anyway, let's take a break and we will change topics and come back in a minute and talk about another hot topic this summer. Okay, back in a second.
Are you interested in history?
Or knitting?
Well, we are too. I'm Heather Boyd.
And I'm Rachel Roden, and we have a new podcast called Historical Yarns that brings the two together.
Each season will have 6 episodes where we dive into the history of a knitting technique and knit a project designed by one of us using that technique.
So join us for Season 1 on August 31st, 2018, here on arcpodnet.com/historicalyarns. Happy knitting!
Hey podcast listeners, do you find yourself wondering what the latest tablet or smartphone could do for your business? Wonder what GPS to pair with your device? Just trying to figure out how to go digital in the field without breaking the bank and or making a bad investment? Or did you find a technology company to work with but just aren't sure the questions you need to ask during the initial conversation? Well, you're not alone. There are literally thousands of tech combinations out there, and it can be really tough finding the right one for your business and your workflow. My name is Chris Webster, and I've been working in CRM since 2005, and I've been a tech enthusiast my entire life. I spend my time trying to figure out how to make archaeology more efficient both technologically and financially. No one is going to give you a big pile of money to do whatever you want with, so you have to make the most of what you have. The right gear can mean the difference between zero margins on that next project and an employee benefits package. That's where DigTech Concierge comes in. Let us be your technology guru. Whether you have just a few questions or want us on retainer 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, we're here to help. With years of experience, tens of thousands of acres of survey done completely digitally, and many, many people trained, DigTech is your tech BFF just waiting to guide you through this process now and through the inevitable changes to come. Should you hold on to those tablets or upgrade? What about the new operating system? Will it crash your apps, or can you go ahead and do it? We know the answers and can guide you to a profitable year. Go to www.digtech-llc.com/tech-concierge to book a consultation or book us for the year. The yearly retainer includes unlimited calls and support and company training on software and gear. That's digtech-llc.com/tech-concierge. And concierge is CONCIERGE. To get going and go digital today. Call us before you make any decisions. We've been there before. Welcome back to episode 143 of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. And we're switching topics now because that last one was a little bit of a kind of blindsided us because we just came out this weekend and we decided we wanted to talk about it. But
Yep. I think it's important.
It's important to address that stuff every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to talk about kind of a fire safety and working in smoke and things like that, because if you're anywhere in the West Coast of the United States, then you're probably working under smoky conditions. I don't know if it's really hit the far south, like Southern California, things like that, but California in general has 3 of the largest fires in its history burning right now, and they're very little contained. Like they're becoming more contained, of course, but the smoke that is coming off the smoldering, even contained areas and areas that are no longer on fire, you've seen fires before, they just smoke forever. So the smoke that is being carried from these weather patterns across the mountains and up into Washington, Oregon, Utah, Nevada, around these areas. I mean, there's no fires near Reno, yet we're in a basin, and the entire basin is filled with smoke, and it has been for about the last month. So,
Yep. Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit. First, let's bring in some positive. What is all these burning federal lands going to do for archaeology? Well,
some of my favorite archaeology. Favorite survey conditions, because all that underbrush is clear. You can see the ground. You can see the archaeology. It's so apparent. It's a little difficult to see obsidian, just to be fair. But that's kind of a pain in the ass. But aside from that, I love the smell of a campfire, and it's so much easier to see the archaeology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, features and other things probably just pop. Yeah.
Artifacts, especially when you have a lot of obsidian or darker cherts and things, that gets a little bit more difficult. But yeah, it's amazing. Everything just pops out and you see so much more, which if you're on the budgeting side, take that into consideration. Yeah. Because you're going to find more. But yeah, it's great.
Let's talk a little bit about let's again, staying on the positive of this. Let's talk a little bit about what this is actually going to mean for the business of archaeology, because in a lot of federal landed areas where a lot of these fires are taking place, they have a mandate to actually do a cultural resources survey to see what was destroyed, what's now visible, because once rain and the winter starts happening, They probably won't do any of that this year, quite frankly, because they've got to work it into their budget. But if they do it this year, or even early next year, if there's, when the rains and snow happens, the runoff is going to be insane, and it's going to make a lot of stuff go out of context, of course, and just destroy the placement of sites. So they have to do it as soon as possible. So this means a lot of archaeology potentially taking place. But Sonia, you've done, I've only done one a long time ago, but you've done some stuff like this before.
Yeah.
What are some
fire
of the
surveys.
things what are some of the things people should be aware of? Because I know there can be some real sooty conditions as well if you get out there real soon, and that can be bad.
You're going to come home a mess. Or when I say home, I mean the hotel.
Exactly. Yeah.
You'll be a mess. It's very sooty. I mean, even after the fire is gone and there's no smoke coming off the area that you're working, your hands are going to be dry and cracking just because of all the soot. You're going to smell like a campfire for weeks. It's going to have some pretty rough conditions on your hair, at least at first. Charcoal is supposedly a detoxifier, so that's helpful.
Yeah.
But it's breathing all that ash in, and just because it's windy, so it burns, and you have a lot of ash laying around, and then all of a sudden there's no windbreak from any of the brush or the trees, or there's less of a windbreak. You're going to end up with a lot of soot blowing on you, and you'll be breathing it in. My suggestions for those is make sure you have at least a couple of handkerchiefs or a mask that you can wear. It'll help, especially if you've got allergies or asthma. That's going to be an issue for you. You're going to smell campfire for weeks. I just
those all your gear.
Don't wear anything white in the field, and don't wash your gear with anything that is of a lighter color.
Right.
Just keep it all together and throw it in the laundry, and maybe wash it at least twice. I would ask for extra hotel towels because you're going to take a shower at least twice every day. And when I say twice every day, I usually mean consecutively, because you're going to take a shower, hop out, towel down, and be like, oh shit, I got all of this stuff all over me. And then you'll hop back in and you'll scrub down again.
Nice.
Serious. It's disgusting, but it's, I love campfire smell. I like this job when I'm working in burned areas. The cool part about it is it clears the vegetation. The bad part about it is that it clears the vegetation. You find more, you have no windbreak, you have no shade, it's hot, it's black, so it's absorbing heat. What are some other risks? There are fewer animals, but you're going to find the animals that you do find are going to be the ones that enjoy the heat. So your salamanders, or not salamanders, your lizards, and your snakes, but they also need to be able to find food. So most of the rodents have been burned out, so keep that in mind. Spiders are pretty common, especially in Nevada. The tarantulas come out in those conditions. They love it. So if you have an uneasy feeling around spiders, consider that. It's really a renewal. And it's a renewal in many different ways. I mean, I don't want to get all philosophical on you, but it's they're really cool conditions, and they're really awful at the same time, but not as awful as trying to climb through vegetation. So, I don't know. In terms of safety, dehydration is going to be a big issue. Cracking skin, big issue. You're going to see fewer of the artifacts, but more of the features. So just be careful where you're walking. You may or may not, just be very careful about stepping into ashy pits, because you don't know if it was a tree at one point. Usually you can tell, but sometimes things tend to collapse. For those of you who are new, we have something out in the West and in the East called root burn. It's where you get a burned tree, and then it continues to smolder along the roots, essentially.
Mhm.
Those things can cause some collapse, so you can have some ankle, like slips, trips, and falls issues. And of course, your asthma and allergy conditions. And when the bloom comes out, it's going to be like that, like the bloom the next year.
Yeah,
It's going to be interesting for you.
I bet.
What do you think?
Yeah, no, all that makes sense. And
Did I get to the point you wanted me to get to?
I think so.
Okay, I covered it.
That was very thorough.
Oh, thanks. I talk a lot.
Well, that's good for a podcaster.
I guess so.
Yeah. So, one of the things I want to bring up too is the archaeology itself, and especially prehistoric artifacts, because, man, we talk about fire affected rock a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I think if you don't understand some of the chemical transitions or transformations, I should say, that take place in rock when it is affected by fire, and what different temperature levels, like, you really got to read the experimental archaeology and find out, okay, so chert, cryptocrystalline silicate, whatever you want to call it, if this is sitting in a flame at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour, this is what's going to happen to it, or for 20 minutes, or if it's in 500 degrees or 1,000 degrees, something like that.
Fire burns at 451 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, that's right, Fahrenheit 451. Yeah. So
so it's not going to sit in a flame at
No. That comes from paper. Paper kicks off at 451 because they were burning books. That's where that comes from.
I thought doesn't like trees and stuff. Let's Google that.
Let's Google that. Yeah. What is like the base temperature of fire? Like, how hot can fire be at its lowest temperature? I think it depends on what it's burning. So since paper comes from trees, then you're probably right. It probably is over 400 degrees just naturally. But anyway, the point is, depending on the time that something is burning and the length of time something is burning, that will affect how it looks and what its properties become, because obviously some rocks become more brittle, some become a little stronger, some change color, different things like that. So when we go out on an archaeological site and we find fire, what we're calling sometimes fire affected rock, sure, it's fire affected, but is it culturally fire affected? And that's a really hard question to answer, because like the Carr fire, CARR, although I think it was started by a mechanical failure in a car, which is also weird. The Carr fire out near Redding, California, they were talking about 200-foot high fire tornadoes at this thing with like ridiculous temperatures.
That was amazing.
I know. And that kind of stuff, I think can make rock look culturally fire affected, when it really gets to those temperatures burning for that long.
Okay. So what do you want to know? A smoldering cigarette?
Sure. What's that at?
Let's see. 400 degrees Celsius, 750 degrees Fahrenheit.
Jesus, really?
Candle, 1800 degrees Fahrenheit.
My God.
Bunsen burner, 2400 to 2900 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Sorry for all you folks in Europe and Canada.
All right. So there are no 200-degree fires, is what you're telling me.
No. I would say base temperature for paper at least is 451 degrees.
Yeah.
But I mean, it also depends on what you're burning. Acetylene fuel.
Right.
What exactly are you burning?
Well, the point of this is fires happen all the time, and they've been happening for the last several hundred million years that this continent has been shaped the way that it is, and any continent that you're on, so fires happen all the time. Lightning starts them. In the past, it was almost exclusively, I would say, lightning that would start fires. Otherwise, lava, I guess, could start fires, but that was a really long time ago in some places. And
hey, Hawaii, dude.
Hey, you're not wrong. So there you go.
That's true. I know I'm not.
I know. But we're looking at culturally affected, culturally affected, fire affected rock here in this country. We're generally looking at stuff that's not older than 15,000 years. So, give or take, depending on what we learn in the next, decade of science. So anyway, when we're looking at just that far back, you're typically looking at lightning based fires and forest fires and things like that. So, do they get hot enough in some areas to make these rocks look like they were culturally fire affected? I don't know. Now, if you find some rocks in a hearth feature, you could probably assume that those were thrown in. But was it done on purpose? Was it just done as part of cooking something, and the weapon that was used to kill it fell out because they couldn't find it or something? I mean, I honestly don't have any idea. But I would just be careful, especially in fire areas that you're working in now.
Yep.
Calling something culturally fire affected. You can say it's fire affected, but maybe make the caveat that you're actually in a forest fire right now.
Yeah, that's a very important note to make in your technical report, assuming you get that far into the project.
Right.
There's a great article called "Fire Effects on Flaked Stone, Groundstone, and Other Stone Artifacts."
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find out. It's under the USD Forest Service General Technical Reports. It was published in 2012. It's by Krista Deal.
Okay.
It's got some great information on spalling and potlitting, grazing, cracking, obsidian temperatures, some reported thermal effects on chert, especially at different temperatures. So things to consider. If we're looking at just a general fire that's temporary and just kind of runs through anywhere from 250 to 752 degrees Fahrenheit, you'll just get a change in the interior luster on chert, But if you're getting super high temperatures over 600 and some to over 1,000, you'll get fractures,
right?
External surface changes. So, things to consider. Make sure that gets into your notes. Very important.
That's a great point. And it's like anything else that's affecting what you're writing down. You should make sure you write it in your notes. It seems obvious, but we don't always do it. I think the most obvious example of that is when we say, "Oh, we've got primary, secondary, and tertiary flakes on a site record." The site record is often divorced from the report, and you got to put down your criteria for what's a primary, secondary, and tertiary flake. Same thing. If you're saying you have fire-affected rock on a site, on your site record, well, you better qualify that you're working in a fire-affected area, and that could be what affected the rock, or maybe not. So. All right. Well, anything else on archaeology that you can think of? Like maybe some dangerous situations like wooden structures and things like that could have been severely weakened, if not completely destroyed?
Yeah. Usually forest fires, for example, are going to do some pretty heavy damage to like log cabins and other structures, including metal. It's going to warp the metal. It's going to burn the logs. It's going to burn interior rafters. Take a great deal of care going into or entering even into a doorway to get photos of burned structures, or even structures that have been slightly affected by fire.
Right.
The reason I say that is it may have only been one corner of the log cabin that got burned, but that corner could be supporting a good chunk of the weight, and all it takes is for you to touch something and it can fall over.
Yeah.
So take a great deal of care on that. Also, if you're on historical archaeological sites, when fire burns down the logs, what gets left behind other than ash?
Nails.
Those little buggers will puncture your boots.
Yeah, they will.
And they will hurt your feet.
Yep.
And they could take you out of a project. So be very, very careful when you're walking over structures that have been burned, across logs. Even when you step over a log into another area, be very careful. Take it slow. I know we're all about working quickly and efficiently, but fire increases your likelihood to get injured even after the fire's out.
And maybe go get a tetanus booster before you go out there.
Yeah, if you haven't already done that, you really do need to. I think it's every 7 to 10 years or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do it. Just do it.
All right. Well, we're going to take our final break, and when we come back, we'll talk about some ways you can protect yourself just working in these smoky areas, even when you're not on the actual fire land. So back in a second. This network is listener supported. We're trying to move away from paid advertising while also creating new shows and supporting the ones we have. The APN has never and will never make a serious profit on our podcast. Every little dime we make goes back into the network and improving show quality. So become a member today at www.arcpodnet.com/members to show your support, get some extras, and be a benefactor for archaeological education. Members get stickers, a coffee mug, a t-shirt, bonus content, early access to episodes, a private Slack team to talk to other members and the hosts, and full access to training on Team Black over at arccert.black. So check out our memberships at www.arcpodnet.com/members today and support archaeological education. That's www.arcpodnet.com/members. Now back to the show. Welcome back to the final segment of episode 143 on the CR Mark podcast. And we've been talking about the archaeology in a fire-affected area and some protection on how you can, things you need to watch out for after the fire's already happened. But if you're working in the West, say right now, especially California, Oregon, and some other areas where the smoke is really bad, it's actually the last 2 days, including today. So today, yesterday in Reno have kind of cleared out just a little bit. I don't know if the weather pattern changed, but it's still smoky. I can't really see it's still hazy off in the distance, but it's not like 1 or 2 mile visibility like it has been for the past 3 to 4 weeks. And I'm a pilot, so we're always concerned with visibility. And there's been some what they call IFR conditions at the airport, so instrument flight rules conditions, where you have less than a mile visibility, and it's essentially a clear day. It's just smoke causing that. So really crazy stuff. But anyway, if you're working in these areas, and even if you don't have asthma or any sort of lung condition or something that would just affect you normally, even if you don't have that, if you're doing heavy survey in the heat and you're in high altitude, even middle altitudes like 3,000 to 4,000 feet and up, and and hell, even if you're not at high altitude, if you're at sea level and you're working really hard, your lungs are open, they're pulling in all this oxygen. Even if you're the healthiest person on the planet, this smoke is going to accumulate in your lungs and it's going to really cause a problem. So
yes, it will.
Yeah, and just drinking water to clear your throat out, that's not clearing your lungs out.
Nope.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I'm not a doctor, so don't take my advice unless you do your own research first.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes an expectorant will help.
Yeah.
Because it's meant to clear your lungs. It's supposed to make you cough.
Mm-hmm.
It's disgusting, but you need to get all that crap out of your lungs.
Yeah, exactly.
Somehow. I can't, I don't know. I can't really tell you the best ways to do that.
Well, I did some research and we have some.
Good.
And I actually, Sonia, I linked to this in our chat right now, but I'll link to this on the show notes. So go check it out. But it's from the Environmental Health Investigations Branch of the California Department of Public Health. And it's a document called Protect Your Lungs from Wildfire Smoke.
Yay.
And I know.
Looking at it now.
Yeah. Some of the big takeaways here are you need a particulate respirator.
Yep.
That's the words you want. And NIOSH is the agency that certifies these things. And then it says look for either N95 or P100 printed on it. And it said they're sold at hardware and home repair stores and pharmacies. The other thing is, as with everything, you can get knockoff versions of these things, and it's not going to be the same thing. So you want to look for these numbers. And the other thing here that I thought was interesting that I didn't even think about, and I guess it's so it fits on your head properly. They said choose a mask that has 2 straps that go around your head. So they show a woman and she's got like a ponytail, and one of the straps is over the top of her ponytail and one of them is over the bottom around her neck. So it kind of surrounds her ears. And they say don't get the ones that wrap around your ears because that's not a good enough spread to really hold it on your face well. So yeah, that's what it says you should look for. And those are the big things. And those masks are not super expensive. It says don't use bandanas, wet or dry. Don't use paper or surgical masks or tissues held over the mouth and nose. These will not protect your lungs from wildfire smoke. So some of that stuff that you might think is maybe taking the smell away, if you think the smell is going away and that's taking the particulate matter out of your lungs or out of your mouth, that's not true. It's small enough to get through there. And these masks have holes that are calibrated and designed to take out certain sizes of particulate matter. And that's what they're saying. This works well for smoke. So
one thing I would suggest, especially to field supervisors first, is go out and buy these for your crew.
Absolutely.
Add it to the cost of doing business.
Sure.
This is a health and safety situation. Okay.
Yeah. If you're going to get them vests, then buy them masks.
Buy the masks, especially if you're working in smoky areas. For those of you who are on crews as crew members, ask your supervisors to get you masks that are appropriate for working in areas that have been that have burned, or in smoky areas. Like my area right now is not on fire, but there is a fire several miles away. If I'm super sensitive, first thing I want to do is go out and get my crews some masks to wear. If they get you a mask, guys, freaking wear it.
Yeah.
Because if you elect not to wear it, the appropriate PPE for the project, if something happens to you and it's documented that you don't wear your mask, essentially you don't get covered.
Right.
So if they get you a piece of equipment, you make sure you wear it. Okay?
Absolutely.
I'm giving you the stern finger waggle on this one. Okay. I know it's uncomfortable. I know it sucks. I've been there. I've done it. I've done this for long enough to know, yeah, this piece of equipment sucks. But it's meant to help you breathe and keep you breathing. And yes, it feels stuffy, but it's a hell of a lot better than you getting, I don't know, black lung from fire ash instead of coal. You know what I mean?
Right.
So take care of yourself. Fire and ash can make you sick. I mean, you can get a cold from it. I can't, it depends on your immune system and everything, but take the time to take care of yourself. You'll appreciate it. You'll appreciate your paycheck. Your field directors are going to appreciate it. The client's going to appreciate it. Everybody's going to be happy if you take care of yourself. So your safety comes first. Okay.
And like a lot of the safety things out there that we use, especially respirators and things like that, you might not see or feel the immediate effects of it, and it might actually be uncomfortable to wear. Like, I mean, we've had to wear fitted, like actual fitted respirators on mines before, and
you might even break out. Like with zits and stuff. It's disgusting, but
right. But you're not going to end up with lung cancer in 20 years. You know what I mean? Or whatever the cause could be. You're not going to end up with emphysema at 35 years old. Well, I mean, you're probably a heavy smoker since you're an archaeologist, but
if it's not nicotine, it still causes lung problems. Okay.
Right.
The cancer, nicotine is part of the cancer, but inhaling all of that crap into your lungs is not good for you. I'm not gonna lecture you on smoking, but these are environmental conditions. This is something that is relevant to your health and safety, and it is important to the companies that you work for, and it's important to you. So stay safe.
And just doing a quick search on Amazon here, there is so much variation in the masks here, and the ones that have like N95 or P100 in the title tend to be around $20 to $25. They probably last a little longer too, so don't balk at that cost too much. Again, cheaper than the health cost of what happens if you don't wear one. But there's also super cheap ones for like $3 or $4, and those do not say that in the title. And you can just tell they're cheap as well. I'm actually not even sure what some of these really cheap ones are really for. Maybe they're just scams. Maybe they're actually for something else, but they're not for the type of smoke that you're going to be breathing in. And especially, you got to remember, like I linked to the California document. I found one from Washington State that was an exact ripoff of the California one. Luckily, they cited that down below, said adapted from the California one at the bottom. Same pictures and everything. It was funny. Anyway, they're both saying the same thing, and they're both specifically referring to smoke, but what they're really talking about is not people working in these conditions. The firefighters, they have respiratory gear that they're wearing, but this is for people just walking around in the smoke, and you're leveling that up. You're out there doing 6 to 10 miles in this smoke, breathing heavy, as we mentioned before, and opening up your lungs and really taking in all that smoke. So even these masks might not be doing the job that you think they're doing, but not wearing the mask is way worse than wearing the mask. So if you're hot, you're uncomfortable. I mean, come on, it's summertime and you're working in a smoky area. You're probably hot and uncomfortable anyway. So what's a little more discomfort?
I hate to put it this way, but between fire and smoke, for the archaeologist, smoke is going to be more lethal to you.
Yeah.
And it can cause cancer. There are quite a few firefighters out there who are fighting cancer simply because of smoke inhalation.
For sure.
So protect your lungs.
Yeah. And if you're working, back to the archaeology a little bit, if you're working around some historic buildings or even even not like really super old buildings, but maybe ones from the 50s, 60s, 40s, something like that. There could be asbestos in there. Yeah, and that's being thrown around by the buildings collapsing, the fires, maybe some fire equipment went in and knocked them down or something like that. So you have to be careful with all that stuff as well. And when you're walking around those things. Yeah. All right. Well, can we think of anything else from a health and safety standpoint that people should be doing, Sonia, that we haven't covered yet? I'm not sure.
I just want to say that, I know that fire conditions are not always the greatest. And I also know that there are archaeologists who go out with firefighters to protect cultural resources during the fires. And most of the time we hear about our firefighters getting killed on the job. There are archaeologists out there that have been killed or injured on the job doing protecting the cultural resources with the firefighters. So I can't tell you how much we respect the work that these folks do to protect our homes and our families from fire, but also our historical resources. So if you are one of those people who are out there working with our firefighters, please know that you're in our thoughts, you're in our prayers. We want you to stay as safe as possible. So wear your gear, do whatever it takes to come home, because we want you with us.
Absolutely.
Stay safe. And I don't know all of the requirements, but I assume it's very similar to what the firefighters wear. Wear your PPE. Keep to your training, and keep doing a good job.
All right. Yeah. So if you're interested in the fire archaeology side of things, which is actually a real thing, actually, they've got a really great Facebook page too. Just look up fire archaeology and you'll find them. But we actually have done several interviews in the past, two to be exact. We did one on fire archaeology. It's episode 57 of the Sierra Mark podcast, and I'll link to that in the show notes. And we also did an interview with a Forest Service archaeologist, Neil Weintraub, on episode 20 of the archaeology show, and I'll also link to that. And he's deeply involved with fire archaeology and vandalism in the National Forest and public outreach and things like that. So between those two episodes, though, you get a really good sense of what fire archaeology is all about. And that's some serious stuff right there. You really gotta have some serious training for it. You have to go out, and a lot of times it's not only identifying cultural resources in advance of the fire, like the fire's right there. It's unpredictable on where it's going to go. So they're looking all around, and if there's structures, you might be placing some of those like fire blankets and stuff over things, or making some fire breaks around different things, all kinds of stuff. But you're out there in the trenches with these guys, and you're just in front of the fire, and those fires move so fast that at any point in time it could just be right on top of you, and you don't have an escape route. So like Sonia said, be careful and watch your training if you're a fire archaeologist. And if you want to be a fire archaeologist, pay attention to your training.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Including
the training that you get as a CRM contractor.
Right.
I mean, that's just a start. So start if you're a CRM contractor and you're interested in fire archaeology, make sure you wear your PPE. Make sure that you are doing what you need to do to get home safely and to work safely, because that's going to be important when you become a fire archaeologist and work in advance of these things.
Absolutely.
It's a dangerous job, and we do want you to come home.
Yep. Okay, well, I don't think we have anything else on this topic. I'd like to hear what you guys are doing out there. If you've got any, are you wearing a mask in the field? Are you, have you found one that you really like? If we can link to it, we will. But let us know what your procedures are. And then on the first topic we had for the day, I also want to know what some of you, I guess, company owners and project managers and people that are in charge of setting up per diem and schedules and things like that. I'm interested to see what you think about our discussion related to that on the first segment of the show. And also, I guess if you're subject to 10 on 4 off and you don't like it, what you're doing to, what you're doing to get around that and your concerns and issues and complaints. So feel free to comment on that as well.
As an owner, I'm very interested in hearing what we could do better and what how we could work out some sort of schedule that would work between what the client requires of us and our deadlines and our budgets.
For sure. So, Okay, well, I think that's all we have for today, and we will be back next week with another exciting topic, I am sure. We kind of had to bump one this week, so I'm not sure what we're going to talk about next time. But anyway, we'll be back for that. And if you as always, if you have any suggestions for what you'd like to hear us talk about or interview suggestions, then head over to the show notes at arcpodnet.com/CRM Podcast and let us know via the email or the comment form. Thanks a lot. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArcPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Bye.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.